and I want to make a short video on the first page and a few lines of the second page of Jacques Lacan's seminar, From Another to the Other. So this is seminar 16. It was published, I think, in French in 2006. Of course, Jacques Miller is publishing slowly but surely the complete set of seminars of Lacan's works. The title, From Another with a big O to the Other with a little o, is a title chosen by Lacan. And he says at the beginning, apart from the sentence that he writes on the board that I will consider just a little later, we have come together again this year for a seminar, the title of which, From an Other to the Other, I chose in such a way as to convey the main landmarks around which I will revolve this year. So he's saying, in case we ever had any doubt, that the title is something that he chose very specifically to indicate the main landmarks. So it will be easy to say that the main landmarks are thus the big O other and the little o other. I would argue, because Lacan is very into logic and into spatializing of logic, that the from to is another landmark, and there may be something to get from the logic of the from to. If we really want to go into micro detail, but I'm not sure I will be able to get to that level with any plausible analysis, we could look at the articles from another to the other. And at first glance, one might want to put things the other way around. Why? Well, now I get into the interpretation of the title. From another, the other, big O other, is the symbolic. To the other, I think we've got a deliberate ambiguity. The other could be, with a small o, could be the mirror stage other, which is just a sort of mirror image of the ego that allows the ego to be constituted, or it could be the little object to little a. And I think most of the weight of the meaning would be towards the object little a. So given that he talks about structuralism later on, we're going from the symbolic to the real in terms of the three registers, imaginary, symbolic, and real. And so from the structure to the object remainder, which doesn't appear in the structure but generates or structurates the structure, if I may be permitted to invert a verb. And maybe it's a warning. Well, that would be the positive move, going beyond the structure, going while keeping it towards something that you can't get at without the structure, but that is not reducible to the structure. And the warning would be against, so that's a sort of upward move of a higher level of analysis, and the downward move, a higher level of subjectivity if you want, the downward move will be taking the A of other as the other of the mirror stage. So I think in this case, because we're talking, Lacan is talking about landmarks, I think it's good to have in mind the graph of desire. So the big A other, I'm not going to be able to do this, of course. Um, the image changes. The big A other. Let me do this. This is fun. I have to think in mirror terms when I'm condemning the mirror image. So the big A other, well, you can see it, is the symbolic, the treasure trove of signifiers. If you, it has two arrows, one that goes down to little I a, to the other of the imaginary of the mirror stage, and then another arrow that goes up to but doesn't really touch the little d, and then goes across to the formula for the phantasm, bar in parentheses bar des diamond A. So the barred or split subject is, I translate the diamond as, is in a complex relationship with little a. So little a is not, big A is on the lines. Little a is on a formula, but not by itself. Little a by itself is somewhere in the higher region of the graph of desire. So anyhow, you see from big A, you can go up or advance to the real, or fall down into the imaginary. So in terms of psychoanalytic discourse, you could, from the big other, either go up to something radically other that doesn't fit into the structure or the structures that you bring into play either as an analyst or an analyst in the psychoanalytic context, or you could slip down into sort of not even pre-given signifiers, but preconceived cliches, stereotypes that sort of serve as a replacement for thought or for dealing with the world. So the graph of desire for me is, well, one, it's wrongly termed the graph of desire. It's the graph of, on a minimum reading, it's the graph of desire and the drive, and the higher part is the part that describes the drive. So it's also a graph of noesis, of philosophical thinking, as opposed to philosophy. So just dealing with things really quickly, you have the line where there's the quilting point in relation, the signifier taken from the big A other that sort of quilts things into place as the social symbolic doxa. You have a higher line, which is of noesis, which is the fundamental fantasy. In terms of philosophy, that will be your own worldview, and not just the worldview of society. It will be your singular worldview, either the worldview that unconsciously governs your life, or in terms of noesis or philosophical thinking. It's your basic worldview, the sort of singular thought that is animating all the particular ideas you come up with. And then if you go up from there and circle, as Lacan says, he's going to circle around this whole area, you're going to be dealing not with your worldview, but with your noetic drive. I wrote that at the top uh, for a different talk. So you, with your noetic drive, which is pushing you further than just sort of coming up at, after a great amount of thinking and research with your own system, and then sort of stopping there and repeating yourself. So the little o other is the getting away from the repetition of preformed ideas and concepts and habits and neuroses, and depending on which domain of life you're talking about. And it's a different sort of, it's a logically higher level of repetition. You're repeating the breaking down of those configurations or structures, and at the same time reconstellating around this repetitive object. So that's my basic grid for understanding what Lacan is saying. The title of the first chapter, From Surplus Value to Surplus Jouissance or Surplus Enjoyment. That chapter title, as far as I can see, doesn't come from Lacan. It's faithful to the content of the first chapter, but the chapter title was chosen by Jacques-Alain Miller when he put everything together into a physical book form. You can see that this chapter title aligns with what we've seen in the title for the whole seminar, Surplus Value. Well, I'm not going to go into everything he says in this chapter, but that would make a very long video. I'm just going into what he says on this first page, which is page 3, and on the second page up to, I would say, the beginning, the first paragraph or so of the first section. So the introduction, or section 0 if you want, the surplus that is not included in the count, is what I'm going to treat. But to deal with it enough to get clarity, I need the first, given that they're broken up into little paragraphs. The paragraphs don't exist because in the unofficial transcriptions, because he's just talking. So that's the parole. Lacan talked, people took notes and broke his discourse up into paragraphs in various ways. Miller has proposed, or not proposed, imposed a structure onto Lacan's parole or speech. So, from surplus value to surplus jouissance. Surplus value, then, for this incipit to the seminar, is something that may be explicitly avowed by the system, the capitalist system, or not, but is intrinsic to the functioning of the system, as the goal of the system. Surplus jouissance, on the other hand, is something not just unavowed, but not really explicitly part of the system, but it's what drives the system. So the move from an other big O, which Marx open up, expanded to include surplus value, to surplus jouissance, that is so the surplus value is part of the political economy. Surplus jouissance is part of the libidinal economy. So the idea is no political economy without libidinal economy, no big other without big O other, without a little o other, both generated and generating the big O other. So these are the landmarks. I say also the logic of the from to, because we can see this in simple spatial terms. We're going from one point to another point, from the big O other to the little o other. That's a little unilateral and irreversible way of linear way of seeing things. My argument that I've given in other videos is that this is not a one-way trip. You don't sort of go through whatever. You go through psychoanalysis for 10 years and you get up to the drive and to the pure other jouissance of the feminine, and that's it. You stop analysis and you're fixed for the rest of your life. You're constantly going up and down. It's a back and forth movement, and even an analyst can be tired sometimes. I'm talking about intellectually tired, not necessarily physically tired, and see things in terms of his pre-learned knowledge, or in terms of his sort of rough and ready heuristic system that he's worked out, or sometimes is more inspired, if that's the right word, is more attuned to the singularity of the analyst and each analyst and with its own singularity, and I would say also the singularity of the session. But that comes up in thinking as well, or in reading. So it's a back and forth movement, and you're slipping and sliding between a sort of cliched understanding of things and a singular understanding of things. And to bring in a word that Lacan uses, and is not really sort of brought up a lot, it's a pulsation. So we seem to be saying a linear or a one-way trip from another to the other. I'm tempted to say, and back again, or put a comma or a semicolon, from the other to another. It's a pulsation between those two, at least those two. And the graph of desire is a complex set of pulsations. So we need some landmarks, as Lacan tells us. They're not rigid dogmas, rigid fixed points. These landmarks that he's set out in the earlier seminars are moving points. I'll continue reading, and then I'll go on to another meaning of the logic of from to. So for the title that I chose in such a way as to convey the main landmarks around which I will revolve this year. So it's sort of like a binary or a trinary solar system. Lacan is not like the center around which everything has to revolve. He's revolving or circumambulating, if you like, around these 2 or 3 landmarks. This discussion will be crucial, for we must define the status of the discourse known as psychoanalytic discourse, whose emergence in our era entails so many consequences. So he talks about emergence, and I would say that's another meaning of the from to. We could say we're going from one point, from the big O other, to another point, the little O other, but we could also say that the little O other emerges from the big O other and doesn't really sort of completely detach itself. I'm making the book the big O other, and I'm making my hand go towards the space. That could happen. I'm not sure if that would be psychosis or not, but we're getting the little O other which emerges. So the real remainder which emerges from the structure of the symbolic structure, but remains tied to it, linked to it, agglutinated to it, however you want to imagine your emergence. So we're talking about emergence rather than reaction, which would be the opposite movement. Okay, he's talking about the emergence of psychoanalytic discourse in our era. So probably he's redefining or defining what our in scare quotes or quotation marks, our era entails. So he's hinting, I would say, at the discovery of the unconscious, the constitution of psychoanalytic discourse, is constituting a new episteme, to use Foucault's word. We're going into a new paradigm, if you want, of thought and of subjectivation that changes because of the emergence of the unconscious and the psychoanalytic discourse. So this brings me back to the little box he put at the top of the book of the page, which Lacan wrote on the board. The essence of psychoanalytic theory is a discourse without speech. So that's pretty enigmatic, because it seems to go against what the title says and what the chapter title says. We're saying that psychoanalytic theory, okay, whatever that is a discourse. When we say discourse without speech, we I don't know about you, but I tend to think discourse structure, speech, so synchronic, a structure sort of all there all at once, at least in logical time, and speech as the opposite of structure, as a flow, and so diachronic, evolving or deploying over time. So I think Lacan is hinting at an inversion of what we would normally think. So he's putting into practice the method that he's talking about. We have our structures that are prejudices or cliches, and we apply them to trying to make sense of even the little sentences that Lacan is giving us, and we come up against problems. So that would be how structures come up against the little a excesses or holes in the argument that we have to somehow deal with. So, speech, parole, is to be tied with psychoanalysis as the talking cure. So, the discovery is that in the talking cure, where the analyst talks, and it seems to be free-flowing, unstructured verbal production, that the psychoanalytic discourse detects or encounters unsuspected structures within the free-flowing speech, holes, gaps, hesitations, one word in place of another. And so it detects a sort of structural assemblage of these discordant elements, and the inability to account for this structuration within a pre-given symbolic structure that one can learn and then apply over and over again to different clients, if you want to see clients instead of adolescents. So we're getting an inversion where speech would belong to the synchronic side of the big other. It's pre-codified, and nonetheless, it belongs to the side of the little other, in that there are elements of its structure that are structuring themselves or being structured by the little a other. There's alterity and not full presence. So you've got otherness, the big O other. It's not us. We're born into language, which is other, and into the symbolic in general, which is other than us. But in psychoanalytic practice and in the discourse that goes with it, we encounter real, instead of symbolic otherness, we encounter real alterity. So a label has been placed on the way in which this discourse proceeds. Structuralism, it has been called, a term that did not require much ingenuity. Here we feel the sarcasm pouring on the part of the publicist, who suddenly coined it a few months ago. So he's talking about a publicist, not an analyst, not a philosopher, a publicist, who suddenly coined it a few months ago in order to encompass a certain number of writers whose work has already long since sketched out several of the avenues of this discourse. There's a lot there. So we're getting to the idea of structuralism that is on the big O other side. It's the label structuralism, and a little later on, he's going to talk about a different sense of structuralism, where it's on the singularity of the thinker side of things. So this made me wonder, who could he be talking about? I think maybe this is a bad question, because explicitly he doesn't name the publicist. So he's erasing the publicist, anonymizing him, because he feels that the publicist erased his own singularity by putting him in what he calls a trash can, so a marketing label called structuralism. So, an eye for an eye. Lacan was, or felt he was, erased by this marketing move, and so he erases the publicist's name. I think a good, even probable option is Francois Wahl, who was in charge of sort of department of philosophical publishing section devoted to structuralism, and published a series of monographs and anthologies with the title "What is Structuralism?" And that was just before this seminar. So both in his publishing practice and in the timeline, Francois Wahl or Wahl, W-A-H-L, is French, so I say Wahl, is a good candidate, but that's a speculation. What I find very interesting is that Lacan is talking about psychoanalytic theory as a discourse, so a particular discourse. Later, he might be seen to be developing this idea when he talks about the discourse of the analyst, when he talks about the 4 discourses or the 5 discourses, including capitalism. So he's not there yet, but the germ of the idea is here. So he's talking about this discourse, the analyst discourse. And he says that some of the people included, some of the thinkers or theorists included under the label structuralism, who were not all psychoanalysts. We can see him as thinking of Levi-Strauss, Althusser. When did we say this came out? In 1968. Maybe he's thinking of Deleuze at this time, although it's just before the publication of Logic of Sense and Difference and Repetition. Who knows? But he's thinking about maybe Saussure, although I want to put some scare quotes around Saussure. But he says these thinkers, who are not all psychoanalysts, sketched out several of the avenues of this discourse. So you've got structuralist in a good sense thinkers who sketch out some of the avenues of the analyst discourse. So that's an interesting decentering of the analyst discourse onto something wider than just psychoanalysts. I just mentioned a publicist. You are all aware of the play on words I've allowed myself around, or in French, publication. So publication, the public part resembles a little, if you're Lacan, publi, poubelle, not so much in the vowels, but in the consonants. And poubelle means a trash can, a garbage can, or a rubbish bin. So you are all aware of the play on words I've allowed myself around, publication and publication. You're all aware because I, Lacan, am so happy with my pun that I repeat it till you're sick of it. No, that's not very fair. Or maybe it is. A certain number of us have thus been dumped into the same trash can, the trash can of structuralism, in the marketing sense, thanks to he whose job it was to do so. this publicist, that I suspect is François Weil. I could have found myself in worse company. So that's an understatement. It means I'm very happy to be grouped with those people. Indeed, I can hardly be uncomfortable. Hardly be uncomfortable. Well, that's sort of double negation to intensify. About those with whom I find myself lumped, they being people for whose work I have the highest regard. So he has the highest regard for Levi Strauss, Althusser, and others, and by implication, the lowest regard for the publicists of this world. Okay, in this era dominated by the genius of Samuel Beckett, we know quite a bit about garbage cans. See, Endgame is the note by Miller. So this is the second occurrence of the word era. So I'm saying, what am I saying? I'm saying that the era, the new episteme, can be considered to be structuralist, but not in the sense of the marketing label or brand name structuralism, but in the sense of those who were put into the trash can, not necessarily ignored or excluded, although Lacan has in mind his famous excommunication, which happened only a few years ago, and he talks about it at the beginning of seminar 11, where he identified with a piece of trash because it's not a publicist trying to put him on the pedestal of structuralism, but it's the inverse move of him being excommunicated from his own, well, wasn't his to begin, he joined, but from his affiliated psychoanalytic society by people he had, at least some of them, trained and educated in psychoanalysis. So whether he's sort of being put sort of on a pedestal or put lower than the low, he considers both operations as assigning him to a trash can. And so that would be the idea that, and he's happy to be with these other people, that he includes Samuel Beckett inside with. So Samuel Beckett is not traditionally associated with structuralism, but in Lacan's view, the real content of the trash can is different from the symbolic content, and the real content logically implies that Beckett is in there too. So the new episteme wouldn't be the symbolic label or brand name structuralism. The new episteme would be whatever is common, the sort of real thinking that is going on with these thinkers that have often been labeled structuralist. Some people label structuralist for Lacan unworthy of notice and not really structuralist in his sense, and others that are not labeled as structuralist, like Samuel Beckett, belong within. Samuel Beckett, he says, thanks to Samuel Beckett's genius, we know quite a bit about garbage cans. So once again, we're going from the symbolic register of the big other in Samuel Beckett's writing to the trash can logic of the literal other that Beckett has already explored or sketched out some of the avenues of this discourse, to take the preceding term at the end of paragraph 2. As for structuralism, we can understand the uneasiness certain people feel owing to the way in which others think they can handle our shared habitat from the outside, and they wish to leave it behind a bit in order to limber up their legs. I'm not sure who Lacan is thinking of there. So we get the idea that for some people, the label structuralism was sort of like the marketing label was like a springboard that sort of put them on the map, and then they decided they didn't want to be reduced to that label, but not for the right motives as far as Lacan is concerned. They maybe there's something partially good in their way of dealing with it, but they want to move away from structuralism, go beyond structuralism, without ever having been in the sort of, we could call it esoteric. There's exoteric structuralism, the marketing structuralism, and esoteric structuralism. That's the stuff that Lacan and Levi-Strauss and Althusser and Samuel Beckett are doing. So these people never identified with the structuralist label, but had something about them that Lacan thinks, okay, well, if you need a signifier, there is a one, so you can adapt structuralism to be the signifier if you put lots of scare quotes and attenuations and qualifications around it. Nevertheless, since an impatience to do so has, that is to get outside of the label and the trash can of structuralism, since an impatience to do so has apparently come over certain people, I have realized that perhaps I'm not so badly off in this wastebasket category after all. So, yeah, I'm willing to be a structuralist, given these people who trying to go beyond structuralism haven't even got to the level of structuralism. They're in the episteme. They haven't even got to the opening of the new episteme that we find in psychoanalysis and that we find in literature with Samuel Beckett. So that's the end of the first part, then the introduction to the first chapter, the non-numbered part. So I'm going to read the beginning of section 1, and that will, I think, confirm the hypotheses that I've been putting forward. So structuralism can only be identified, or so it seems to me at least, with something that I will quite simply call seriousness. So whatever that means, we know that Lacan considers himself serious in his thought. He considers Levi-Strauss and Althusser and Beckett as serious. Whatever the title, whatever the brand name that you give to what groups them together. I'm going to read a quotation that Jacques-Alain Miller said about this passage. I think it's about this passage in Jacques-Alain Miller's seminar of 2005. These are all available in French online in PDF form. So in 2005, that's the year before the French book was of the seminar was published, and so he devoted a year to an extended commentary, but not scholarly in the ordinary sense, an extended commentary of from another to the other. And he doesn't quote this beginning, but he says, it sounds like a quote to me, why is structuralism serious? Inasmuch as the serious is the serial, so there he's doing a Lacanian sort of punish association. The serious that is truly serious is the serial, which is made up of elements, of sequences, of configurations, of homologies, of repetitions. So what is serious for Lacan is the logic of the signifier. That is to say, the opposite of a philosophy, inasmuch as every philosophy relies on the adequation, the transparency, the agreement, the harmony of thought with itself. My translation. So this gives an expansion for what Lacan says. Structuralism can only be identified, or so it seems to me at least, with something that I will quite simply call seriousness. So you can take it in both senses. You can take it in the sense that we're doing serious thought. So taking the graph of desire as a graph of noesis, or of serious thought, or of thought from the most stereotyped to the most serious, we're up in the upper sort of crescent moon top area. Excuse me. Or we can take seriousness in a sense that sort of spells out what part of what that could mean. And seriousness there means seriality, whatever that means. Because I think Lacan will, like Deleuze, sort of take series seriously, and then at a certain point say, well, a series, that's like a line, isn't it? And then talk in terms of lines and figures and topologies and so on. So we mustn't stay hung up on the word series. So seriousness will be series, elements and sequences. Okay, so we're sort of elements that can be lined up in series. Sequences, that's the concrete instantiations of series. Of configurations, where widening up a configuration can be in two or more dimensions, whereas we tend to think of series as being one-dimensional. Of homologies, so where it can have multiple configurations that could be put in different relations of relation or disrelation to each other, of repetitions, and etc. Different types of repetition, as I indicated earlier. So that's a sort of spelling out of what one possible instantiation of what seriousness means. Be that as it may, structuralism in no way resembles a philosophy. Okay, then we're going to get into the war between psychoanalysis and philosophy, and philosophers intellectualize and they don't have clinical experience, and psychoanalysts, they study philosophy, but they've got real experience in the clinic and so on. But there's an important qualification. If we use that word to designate a worldview, or even some way of grounding intellectual positions, whether on the right or on the left. Okay, so Lacan is having a dig at philosophy, but not at all philosophy, only at philosophy that takes the form of a worldview or an intellectual grounding, as sort of search for or posing of foundations for thought. So maybe this dig at philosophy was okay in November 1968, which, to be more precise, I will once again look up November the 13th, 1968. It's a little funny, him having a dig at philosophy as being a worldview in November 68, when May 68 was sort of had begun exploding stereotypes and old style systems. I would say that today, in any case, lots of philosophers are not proposing worldviews. So this particular dig is not applicable to them. Zizek doesn't propose a worldview. He's explicitly against it. Heidegger was against the epoch of the worldview. Deleuze was proceeding by what he called heterogenesis. So he was against the static image of thought, the closed, or what he called the state image, which would have been a worldview, and was working towards the nomadism of thought. So I'm not sure who Lacan is explicitly thinking of. Maybe Sartre. I don't know who, if he had anyone in mind, or he just was going on how philosophy is not necessarily as bad as the publicist, but is given a negative valuation insofar as it's concerned with a world view production or founding. If, as a psychoanalyst, I had tried in any way to introduce what is ridiculously called a psychoanalytic anthropology, that will be a worldview based on psychoanalysis, it would suffice in order to refute me, the bad me that I'm imagining, to recall at the very threshold of this domain the constitutive truths psychoanalysis brings with it. They concern those that Genesis tells us God created man and woman. So if ever Lacan, fell into the trap of trying to propose a worldview, anyone could just say, what about sexual difference? Lacan, you're forgetting that when you were all about it before. So that's as far as I want to go. I get the feeling that the worldview era, if we're going to take a charitable reading of Lacan, that puts his remarks about worldviews and philosophy in alignment with what he's been saying up to now, Lacan is announcing the end of the era of the worldview and the coming into emergence of something else that could be called serious structuralism, as opposed to market labeled structuralism. And he's putting his own work, in particular this seminar, under the sign of that movement from another big O other to the other little O other, and he's hoping that he will not fall back into a dogmatic version of his own thought, in which case he would be proposing a worldview, and hoping that if ever he did that, his listeners or his interlocutors anywhere would remind him of the sexual difference as a logical concept that he has developed earlier that unmakes all worldviews and the very possibility of coherent and complete worldview, which will be under the sign of the big other and would be in the same old process of excluding uh, the uh, the little o other, the drive, the not the surplus jouissance of capitalism, but the other jouissance of the drive. So thanks. I hope that clarified some things about this introduction, which can seem a little obscure or empty at first, but is surprisingly rich when you try and put all the different sort of um, micro concepts um, in alignment with each other. So that will be another reading of the title, from the big O other to the little o other, would be from the macro to the micro, because that's where you can say from the abstract to the concrete. So the micro is where the concrete of the real comes into play. So please, if this is of any use to you, please make a comment, ask a question, and this is a one-off video for me. But if you want more of the same on this same seminar, bearing in mind that I've just been talking from not from my worldview, but from my philosophical experience. I'm not an expert in Lacan by any means. If you want to know more about what I've been discussing in relation to Lacan, maybe there are a couple of videos available, not on my channel, I don't think, but on Philosophy Portal and on Theory Underground, where I talk about the graph of desire, and on my blog, Agent Swarm, WordPress blog. So hopefully I will hear from you, and that's all for now.